of the problems that we have in the world that we live in our contemporary times, is that we have spent a tremendous amount of energy in taking things apart, trying to understand things from a scientific point of view. And the problem that we have is that we're having a very difficult time putting it all back together again. There is probably nowhere, no area of human endeavor that this is more obvious in than in nutrition. We know how our food works down onto the molecular level, and the problem is we don't know what to eat. This is displayed if you go on to, if you Google diet or if you Google nutrition, what you'll find is the Tower of Babel represented on the page. Right? This is good for you, that's good for you, this causes cancer, that causes heart disease, this will cure every ailment, eat this fruit and you'll stay young forever. Some man who lives in the desert and eats honey and garlic and lives to be 105, and oh my gosh, we've discovered the secret bullet, the philosopher's stone. It's a big problem. One of the things I think that macrobiotics does is help bring some clarity to that conversation. It doesn't need to bring clarity to that conversation, but it can bring clarity to that conversation. Because it takes nutrition, it takes the issue of what we eat, and it puts it in a large perspective. The world that we live in, nature, the planet itself, is an orderly place. Everything works together. When we look at the environment, even if it's on the Discovery Channel, when we look at the environment, we see how everything seamlessly fits into a pattern where everything is complementary to everything else, except, of course, when we look at what human beings do. We seem to have tried to break loose from that pattern, and with terrible repercussions. So in terms of nutrition, there are a number of different things that we could consider to bring about a greater understanding of nutrition. And the first, of course, is the personal part of that, the personal part of nutrition. How do we eat in a way that assures us, as much as possible, good health? How do we do that? How do we eliminate those evasive risk factors? How do we eat in a way that really is going to provide good nutrition? And we get into this whole arena of looking at different kinds of diet or different secret bullets out there. And the interesting thing is that when we look at the study of large groups of people, the epidemiology that I referred to in another talk, when we look at most of the scientific study, one of the amazing things is the amount of agreement about that. If we discount all of the fad diets, right, what we see is that most scientists, nutritional scientists, and the people that study nutrition from a big point of view agree that we should be living on a plant-based diet primarily. That includes whole cereal grains, vegetables, beans, fruits, seeds, nuts, natural oils, all of these things together. How we do that and how we break it up, people may disagree on. But the primary elements are all there. How to produce good health and how to diminish the impact of most of our modern diseases. Diseases like diabetes and heart disease and stroke and many different kinds of cancer. That's laid out. That's not really contentious anymore. When I started studying macrobiotics in the mid-1960s, that was terribly contentious, but it's not anymore. It's been shown that that kind of a diet is a healthy diet. So this is the personal part. Now, we may not like that conclusion. In fact, many people hate that conclusion. They hate to think that they're going to have to stop or even diminish their consumption of meat or dairy food, or that they're going to have to stop eating sugar. But that's a whole other issue. That's not a nutritional issue. That's a cultural and an emotional issue. When the mayor of London goes into a rant Boris Johnson, bless his cotton socks, right? Well, when he goes into a rant because the UN, he thinks, is trying to tell him to cut down on meat and suggests that everybody has a big barbecue in Trafalgar Square and that the grease drips down their chops while they eat meat, and shakes their fist at the United Nations for having the audacity to tell them not to eat meat. See, that's not a nutritional argument, a common sense argument. That's not an argument about health. That's an argument about Boris Johnson's emotional derangement. Right? So we have to be able to separate those things out. And then under the personal category, we also have the issue of personalizing that down to down to a more refined level. What are specific needs? Now, those specific needs might have to do with the climate that we live in, the kind of activity we do, or they may even have to do with locating particular kinds of foods or particular kinds of preparations that have to do with, say, accelerating the breakdown of cholesterol. Say we have high cholesterol levels, and we want to see if there's a particular way of eating which might benefit us in doing that. Or we might have an inflammatory process in the body, and we want to know which foods would actually exacerbate that. And so we want to find out which foods will actually promote inflammation or feed inflammation, and we want to make sure that we avoid all of those. See, those are kind of conversations that go on within a macrobiotic approach to eating quite commonly. So those are personal things. But there's a bigger conversation yet, and that bigger conversation has to do with the social impact of what we do. Does our consumption of a particular food or a particular kind of food lead to social exploitation? Does it lead to higher health costs, which we all pay for in one way or another? Does it lead to the undermining of the health of a particular economic strata within society? When we look at nutrition from that point of view, what we see is that there are many areas that we really need to change our attitude about nutrition. The fact that people who are not making so much money, people who are living close to the poverty line, are more and more being forced into a cul-de-sac where they are eating cheap food, and that cheap food is also food which is just causal of the disease, the obesity epidemic that we're experiencing, or particular kinds of cancer. These are things that we have to approach from a point of view that's a little bit different from that personal point of view. But interestingly, it all fits together. If we were to promote a diet which was a very healthy diet for everyone, and if we were to make that diet affordable, right, which it is and can be very simply, right, then we would be benefiting the whole tribe of humanity. We would be helping to solve the problem of world hunger, for instance, because we were growing foods which were sustainable and which were environmentally friendly and which promoted health, rather than having governments that were so cowardly that they wouldn't stand up to the food industry and say, look, we're not going to subsidize you anymore. We're going to take the money of the people and we're going to put it behind producing healthy food. See, this is the social aspect of eating. And that's an important conversation that we all need to be having. We need to be having that social conversation around the foods that we import. We need to see that when we buy those big, beautiful yellow bananas, which is the fourth largest food crop in the world, that those big bananas are available to us on the backs of peasant farmers in Central America who really cannot afford to live, right? And cannot grow their own food anymore because they're too busy growing bananas for people in America and Europe who want those bananas to be in a particular way. We could say the same thing about most coffee or cocoa beans. Many products that we use. The tomatoes that we might use in Europe, which are grown in Africa. amazingly. And the same kind of situation exists where the people that grow them can't afford to grow their own food or buy a food that's grown locally and have to import the food. It's a big con game, a shell game. And we're eating those foods on the back of other people. And oftentimes being blissfully unaware of the impact of that. And not only the impact on the people, but the impact on the land. Those same bananas, in order to get them the way that we want them, those big yellow bananas, we have to use a lot of chemicals. And so a lot of chemicals are used and completely pollute the soil, completely pollute the rivers. So not only are the people living on wages which are starvation wages, but they're also ruining their land in the process and polluting their rivers in the process. All because we want a banana, the nutritional worth of which is totally negligible. We could get the same nutrition from many, many other foods. But we like our bananas on our Rice Krispies, right? So we have to think about that. We have to be mindful about that process. And that process goes on to the environment itself, right? Because there are many foods that we use, and the biggest culprit here really is meat, right? which we know of, where because we've chosen to go down a path, a nutritional pathway, of convincing ourselves through very, very bad science and really dodgy history that meat is the food for human beings and the food for man particularly, not to confront tofu phobia today. Maybe we can do that another time, but to go down that pathway where meat is the food that makes us really healthy when all the science points us in the other direction. And that's all the science. That doesn't mean Atkins, it doesn't mean Dukan, it doesn't mean all of the flim-flam artists that are out there trying to sell a meat-rich diet to a population which is facing environmental disasters because of the meat industry, right? So we have to face up to that fact, because when we're eating a food, the production of which is undermining environmental sustainability, we have to figure out a way to stop eating that food, right? What kind of a planet do we want to leave for our children and our grandchildren? So this is an important part of the conversation of nutrition. This shouldn't be put off to the side. This is in the main track. So we have our personal needs, we have our social needs, we have our environmental needs, and we even have another need which supersedes all of those. Don't you find it interesting that almost every spiritual community since the beginning of time had a particular way of eating? And that particular way of eating was, regardless of any other consideration, to help us to focus, to pay attention on what was happening when we ate, to bring consciousness into the conversation around food. That when we take in food, we're taking in the labor of other people, and we're also taking in the labor of the cook, and we're taking into us the gift from the environment that food represents. So we're taking that in, and the more conscious we become of that process, the more mindful we become of that process, the more our awareness starts to open up. We start to be aware of a simple action that we take every day and the repercussions of that action. What does that action mean? Because that action, the effect of that action, ripples out from us into the world. So the question of nutrition is an extremely big question. And that's why we call it macrobiotics.